I demand that deed as an apology. It is the least you can do.
But Mom, it's my home.
How dare you defy me?
My name is Delaney Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and 11 months ago my mother sat across from me at my own dining table, slid a manila envelope across the polished wood, and told me the fastest way to fix our broken relationship was for me to sign my house over to her. Not lend her money, not gift her a car. The deed to a home worth $1.5 million. A home I built with my own 2 hands, my own contracts, my own 12-hour days for 6 years straight. She called it an apology present. Like I was the one who owed her something. Like I hadn't spent my whole childhood being the afterthought in my own family. If you think that's outrageous, stick with me, because what I found in an old shoebox 3 weeks later didn't just end my mother's demands. It ended her marriage, her reputation, and the version of her life she'd spent 30 years constructing on a foundation of lies. Growing up in Bellevue Heights, Ohio, there were 2 kinds of days in the Whitfield house. The days that revolved around my older brother Preston, and the days that didn't matter. Preston got the new car at 16. I got Preston's old bicycle at 17. Preston got standing ovations at every school function my mother, Marlene, could attend. I got told to stop being so sensitive when she skipped my college acceptance dinner for his baseball banquet. My father, Walter, died when I was 22. And in the chaos of that grief, Marlene remarried within 14 months, to a contractor named Roger Cosgrove, a man Preston adored and I never trusted. I built my career in commercial real estate development from nothing. No family money, no favors. By 31, I'd closed enough deals to build my dream home outright. No mortgage, just years of sacrifice turned into 4 bedrooms and a view of the reservoir. My mother visited exactly twice before the day she asked for the deed. That night after she left, I didn't cry. I got curious. And curiosity, as my mother would soon learn, is a dangerous thing to hand a woman who builds buildings for a living. To understand why my mother thought she could ask for my house, you have to understand the doctrine she raised us under. Preston Cosgrove Whitfield could do no wrong, and Delaney Whitfield could do no right. When Preston crashed his first car into a mailbox at 19, my mother called it boys being boys. When I got a B+ in AP Calculus, she asked what happened to the girl who used to be so promising. Preston never finished college. He drifted through 4 different business ventures, each funded quietly by our mother, each collapsing within 18 months. A food truck, a crypto consulting firm, a vending machine route he lost the paperwork for. Every failure was reframed to me as an entrepreneurial learning curve. Every one of my successes was reframed as luck or worse, as something I owed the family for. The apology present request didn't come out of nowhere. 3 months before she asked for my deed, Preston's 4th venture, a used car lot he ran with Roger's help, collapsed under a mountain of debt. Collection notices. A lien threat. My mother needed cash, fast and quietly, and she'd apparently decided the fastest route wasn't asking me for a loan. It was asking me to hand over the one asset large enough to make the whole problem disappear. She dressed it up in the language of reconciliation. "I know I wasn't the mother you needed," she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she never actually used. "Let me make it right. Let this house be how we heal." I remember sitting there thinking, healing doesn't usually come with a notary. The manila envelope she slid across my table that night wasn't empty small talk. It had a quitclaim deed form already partially filled out, my name pre-printed as the grantor, hers as the grantee. She'd had it prepared by an actual attorney. This wasn't a spontaneous emotional ask. This was planned. "You want me to sign this tonight?" I asked, staring at my own name in someone else's handwriting. "I want you to trust me," she said. "For once in your life, trust your mother." I asked her calmly, why the house? Why not a loan? Why not equity? Why the entire deed? She said something about keeping it in the family properly, about Roger's business troubles needing family support, about how Preston had already sacrificed so much for this family. A sentence so absurd I almost laughed out loud in my own kitchen. I told her I needed time to think. She told me that not signing immediately was just like me. Always calculating, never generous. Then she stood up, smoothed her blazer, and said the words that would haunt her for the rest of this story. "You have 30 days before I stop being patient with you, Delaney. Families don't have secrets from each other. Remember that." I remember thinking as she walked out my front door. Neither do daughters who've spent a lifetime being underestimated. I didn't sign anything. Instead, I did what I always do when something doesn't add up in a deal. I started pulling records. Property records. Business filings. I found the LLC behind Preston's failed car lot. And I found Roger Cosgrove's name buried 3 layers deep in the paperwork as a silent partner, personally liable for a debt north of $400,000. I also went to see my Aunt Deborah, my late father's younger sister, someone my mother had quietly frozen out of our lives after Walter's death. Deborah had spent a decade estranged from us, and when I showed up at her porch in Millfield unannounced, she didn't seem surprised at all. She finally came for the house, Deborah said. It wasn't a question. She told me things I'd never heard, that my mother had remarried Roger faster than anyone thought was decent, that there had been money troubles even back then that nobody in the family ever discussed, and that my father's life insurance payout, the one my mother told us went entirely to funeral costs and Preston's college fund, had actually been over $300,000. I asked her how she knew. She went inside and came back with a small wooden box. Old letters. A folded newspaper clipping. And one photograph, slightly yellowed, tucked into a side pocket I almost missed. Your mother doesn't know I kept this, Deborah said. She thought she destroyed every copy. The photograph was ordinary at first glance. A picture from a lake house gathering, maybe 11 or 12 years old, judging by how young Preston looked in it. My mother stood beside Roger, laughing, a glass raised. But it was who else was in the frame that mattered. My father's business partner and closest friend, a man named Gerald Voss, standing just behind my mother with his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that no photograph of two just friends ever looks. The date stamped in the corner was 8 months before my father died. Deborah explained the rest piece by piece. Gerald Voss had co-owned a small logistics company with my father. After Walter's sudden heart attack, that company was quietly sold off within 4 months, faster than grief should allow anyone to make major decisions, and my mother received a consulting payout, alongside the insurance money that nobody in the family had ever been told about. Deborah suspected, though could never prove at the time, that my mother and Gerald had been involved while my father was still alive, and that the rushed sale of the company conveniently benefited both of them. I sat on Deborah's porch holding a single photograph that suddenly explained 12 years of unexplained gaps. Why Deborah was frozen out, why my father's company vanished from every family conversation, why my mother remarried so fast, and why she now needed cash urgently enough to ask her daughter for a house. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. But underneath the sickness was something colder and steadier, clarity. I am not a woman who acts on impulse. I build things. Contracts, timelines, deals. So instead of calling my mother screaming, I built a file. I requested the old company sale records through a public business filings request. I found the closing date of the logistics company sale, 4 months and 6 days after my father's funeral. I found the buyer, a firm partially owned at the time by Gerald Voss himself. I cross-referenced the consulting payout language Deborah remembered with the actual closing documents, which listed my mother as receiving a lump sum described only as transition compensation. Then I found something Deborah hadn't known about. 3 years after my father died, Gerald Voss's name appeared as a co-signer on the mortgage for the house Preston grew up finishing high school in. The house my mother told us Grandpa Whitfield helped out with. Grandpa Whitfield had been dead for 6 years by that point. Every piece fit into a picture my mother had spent over a decade making sure nobody would ever see clearly. My father's death funded her next chapter, a chapter that started well before he was gone, a chapter she recast for us as tragedy and sacrifice when it was actually convenience and timing. I printed everything. I made copies. And I called a family meeting, the first one I had ever called in 34 years. I hosted it in my dining room, the same table where she'd slid me that envelope. Preston came, annoyed at being summoned. Roger came, distracted, still fielding calls about the car lot debt. My mother came last, dressed like she was attending a luncheon rather than a reckoning. I've decided about the house, I said, and I watched her face relax before I even finished the sentence. I'm not signing the deed, but I do have something for you. I slid the folder across the table instead of the deed she'd once slid to me. Inside, the photograph, the sale records, the timeline, the mortgage co-signature. I said nothing while she opened it. I didn't have to. Preston read over her shoulder and went pale. Roger's phone, for once, stayed silent in his pocket, his face frozen on the mortgage document with Gerald Voss's signature beside his own house's original loan. My mother's hands shook, but her voice, when it finally came, was pure defense. You don't understand the context. Your father and I understand the timeline, I said. That's all a photograph and a closing date really need to say. She tried anger next, accusing me of digging through the family's past to destroy her out of jealousy over Preston. I let her finish. Then I told her the only thing I actually wanted to say. I was never going to give you my house, but I needed you to understand why asking me was the last mistake you were allowed to make at my expense. I didn't have to do anything else after that meeting. My mother did the rest to herself. Roger, blindsided by the mortgage revelation and already drowning in Preston's business debts, filed for divorce within 6 weeks. Not out of moral outrage over an affair from over a decade ago. People forgive stranger things. But because he suddenly understood that a decision he thought was generous, co-signing a house years ago, had actually been engineered around him by a wife hiding an old relationship with the man who profited from her first husband's death. Trust, once it cracks like that, doesn't often survive contact with a lawyer's letter. Preston, who had spent his whole life being protected from consequences, finally faced the full weight of the car lot debt without our mother's quiet bailouts to shield him. She no longer had the resources, tied up in a divorce and a reputation crumbling in a small town where everyone eventually hears everything. Bellevue Heights is not a large place. Word travels through church pews and grocery store aisles faster than any lawsuit. My mother called me 11 times in the 2 weeks after the meeting. I answered once. She asked how I could do this to her. I told her calmly that I hadn't done anything. I'd simply stopped protecting a story that was never true to begin with. I want to be honest about something, because I promised myself this story would never become about proving I was better than her. I had the option to go further. I had enough documentation, according to the attorney I eventually consulted quietly, to potentially pursue a civil claim tied to the original estate distribution, given how the company sale timeline lined up with my father's death. Deborah encouraged it. Some nights so did the angriest part of me. I chose not to. Not because my mother deserved mercy. I'm honestly still deciding how I feel about that word when it comes to her. But because I realized somewhere in the middle of building that file that I didn't want the rest of my life to be organized around her mistakes the way my childhood had been organized around Preston's needs. I had spent 34 years reacting to what she wanted. I wasn't going to spend the next 34 fighting her in court for what she'd already lost on her own. I kept my house. I kept my Aunt Deborah, who I now see every month instead of once a decade. I kept my peace, which turned out to be worth considerably more than $1.5 million. It's been 11 months since the manila envelope landed on my dining table. My mother lives in a rented condo across town now, funding it herself for the first time in over a decade. Preston sold what was left of the car lot's assets to cover part of the debt, and from what I hear through Deborah, actually got a steady job at a logistics company, not one connected to Gerald Voss, thankfully. Roger moved out of state. I haven't spoken to Gerald Voss, and I don't intend to. My mother texted me on my birthday this year. For words, I think about you. I didn't respond. Some relationships don't get repaired with an apology present or a photograph. They simply end where the truth finally catches up to them, and everyone left standing has to build something new out of what's left. I still have that photograph. I keep it in the same wooden box Deborah gave it to me in, not as a weapon anymore, just as a record. A reminder that the people who ask you to prove your love with everything you've built are rarely the people who ever built anything for you. My house still looks over the reservoir. My name is still the only one on the deed. And for the first time since I was a little girl watching my brother get everything I was never offered, that feels less like winning, and more like finally simply being safe.